Imagine winning a landslide election victory with a 174-seat majority just 18 months ago, crushing your opponent so thoroughly that political commentators were talking about generational dominance, and then having thousands of people signing petitions demanding you call another election immediately because they think you lied your way into power. That's the reality Keir Starmer is living in right now, as a fresh petition calling for a snap general election has gathered over 49,000 signatures in just days, with the creator accusing the Prime Minister of lying to gain power and betraying pensioners and farmers. And this isn't even the first petition demanding his removal. There's another one that hit the 100,000 threshold to trigger a parliamentary debate, scheduled for January 12th in Westminster Hall. Meanwhile, senior Labour sources are admitting to the BBC that campaigning to replace Starmer is actively happening within the party, and the man himself has acknowledged the speculation is pretty rife. So buckle up, because we're diving into how the most unpopular Prime Minister in recorded history is facing calls for his removal barely a year into his term, what the petition actually says and why it's resonating, whether snap elections are even remotely possible or just fantasy politics, and what it means when your own party is openly plotting against you while you're still supposed to be in your honeymoon period. This is UK Political Insight, and honestly, the speed of this political collapse is almost impressive. Let's start with the petition itself, because understanding what people are angry about requires looking at what they're actually saying. Robert Barnes, the creator, didn't hold back in his accusations. He wrote, "On July 4, 2024, Sir Keir Starmer was elected as Prime Minister. Since then, his government has introduced measures that were not included in the Labour Party's manifesto. We believe we were misled, and the obfuscation has only gotten worse since Starmer took power. It is time for action." That's a pretty serious charge. He's not just saying policies are bad or mistakes were made. He's explicitly accusing Starmer of electoral fraud, essentially of lying about what he'd do in order to win votes and then doing something completely different once in power. And given what we've covered extensively on this channel about the 52 broken promises on tax, the abandoned business rates reform, the policies targeting pensioners and farmers, that accusation of being misled isn't exactly unfounded. Barnes continues, "We believe the government has failed to defend our borders from the small boats. We have no confidence in the way this government has acted. Pensioners and farmers have been directly affected by policies that were not included in Labour's manifesto." So he's hitting multiple pressure points here. Immigration, which we just covered in the previous video, is predicted to get worse in 2026 despite all of Labour's promises. Pensioners, who lost winter fuel payments that Labour didn't mention taking away during the campaign, and farmers, who are facing inheritance tax changes that threaten family farms and sparked protests across the country. These aren't fringe issues affecting tiny numbers of people. These are major policy areas touching millions of voters who feel they were specifically lied to about what Labour would do. Then he finishes with, "Our country cannot go on like this. Dissolve Parliament and call a general election now." The urgency in that language is striking. Not, "we should consider having an election soon," or "perhaps another vote would be appropriate." It's "dissolve Parliament now," implying the situation is so dire that continuing even another day under this government is unacceptable. That's the kind of language usually reserved for genuine constitutional crises, not just unpopular governments. The fact that nearly 50,000 people signed this within days of its creation, and this is the second such petition to gain massive support, suggests the sentiment isn't just coming from a small group of committed activists. There's genuine, widespread fury out there. The petition specifically accuses Starmer of lying to gain power and betraying pensioners and farmers, with Barnes adding, "The people of our great country have had enough." These are strong words. Lying isn't just getting policy wrong or changing your mind based on circumstances. It's deliberate deception. Betrayal isn't just disappointing supporters. It's actively working against their interests after they trusted you. And "the people have had enough" is revolutionary language, the kind of rhetoric that precedes governments falling. Whether it's justified or hyperbolic probably depends on your political perspective, but the fact that it resonates with tens of thousands of people tells you something about the depth of anger toward this government. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Can any of this actually happen? Can Starmer be forced to call a snap election? The short answer is no, not really. Under the Fixed-Term Parliaments Act of 2011, which was subsequently repealed and replaced by the Dissolution and Calling of Parliament Act of 2022, the power to dissolve Parliament and call elections returned to the Prime Minister. That means Starmer himself would have to decide to call an early election, or his government would have to lose a vote of no confidence. Given that Labour has a 174-seat majority, losing a vote of confidence would require mass rebellion from his own MPs. Around 88 of them would have to vote against their own government. That's theoretically possible, but practically unlikely, because voting down your own government typically means triggering an election that could cost you your seat. So these petitions, while politically significant and showing public anger, aren't going to directly force an election. What they can do is increase pressure, contribute to a narrative of illegitimacy, and potentially embolden MPs within Labour who are already questioning Starmer's leadership. The parliamentary debate scheduled for January 12th will be interesting, not because it might result in an election, but because it'll force MPs to publicly defend or criticize the government on these issues. Conservative and Reform UK MPs will obviously use it as an opportunity to attack Starmer. But what will Labour backbenchers say? Will they defend Starmer enthusiastically, or will their responses be tepid and defensive? That'll tell us a lot about how solid his position really is. Starmer's New Year address tried to strike an optimistic tone, promising that 2026 will be the year life in Britain finally changes. He acknowledged that 2025 was tough for families and promised real change in energy bills, workers' rights, public services, and child poverty levels. Then he said, "There is a word we've forgotten in politics: hope. This is the year we can rediscover it and look forward with confidence." That's actually pretty good rhetoric, the idea that hope has been forgotten and he's bringing it back. Except it's completely undermined by the fact that nobody believes him. When your approval rating is -66 and tens of thousands are signing petitions calling you a liar, promising hope rings hollow. It's like someone who's repeatedly broken promises trying to convince you to trust them one more time. The words might be right, but the credibility isn't there. The obvious promise of real change in 2026 is a tacit admission that 2025 didn't deliver real change, which is awkward when you spent the entire campaign promising exactly that. Labour's whole pitch was change, moving on from conservative chaos, making things better. If after a full year in office you're still promising that change is coming, you're essentially admitting the first year was a failure. And voters noticed that. They were told change would happen immediately, that Labour had a plan ready to implement. Instead, they've seen tax increases, policy U-turns, broken promises, and general chaos that doesn't look qualitatively different from the conservative governments they voted to replace. The catalog of Starmer's troubles in 2025 is genuinely impressive in its breadth. He battled dissent in his own party, which is supposed to be manageable when you've got a massive majority, but apparently isn't. He lost his deputy, Angela Rayner, which, depending on the specific context, might mean she resigned or was forced out, but either way, losing your second in command is a major blow to any leader. His approval ratings dropped to recorded lows, and we've covered those extensively. -66 is genuinely historic, and support for the Greens and Reform UK soared, meaning voters who are abandoning Labour aren't returning to the Conservatives. They're going to alternatives on both the left and the right. That's politically devastating because it suggests Labour is hemorrhaging support in multiple directions, not just to one obvious alternative. The admission from a senior Labour source to the BBC that "I wouldn't insult your intelligence by trying to pretend campaigning to replace him isn't going on" is absolutely extraordinary. That's a senior figure within Starmer's own party publicly acknowledging that people are actively working to remove him. Usually, these things happen behind closed doors with careful deniability. Nobody admits it's happening because that would be seen as disloyal and damaging. But apparently, the situation is so obvious, the discontent so widespread, that this source felt they couldn't even pretend otherwise. That's a devastating signal of weakness. When your own people can't be bothered to maintain the fiction that everything is fine, you know things are very not fine. Starmer addressing the speculation himself before Christmas is also telling. He said, "It seems to be pretty rife," which attempts to make light of the situation, to suggest he's relaxed about it and not threatened. But acknowledging it at all is a sign of weakness. Strong leaders don't need to address speculation about their position, because there isn't any, or it's so marginal it doesn't merit response. The fact that Starmer felt compelled to comment suggests the speculation had reached the level ignoring it was no longer viable. And trying to laugh it off doesn't make it go away, it just confirms that everyone's talking about whether he's going to survive. The previous petition that reached 100,000 signatures triggering the January 12th Westminster Hall debate is significant because this isn't a flash in the pan. This is sustained, growing anger that's finding formal outlets. Westminster Hall debates don't directly